I can't wait for you to meet my next guest. Her name is Robyn Harris. I have been so looking forward to this interview. This is the most extraordinary woman who has a voice that speaks from the heart on the deepest level of awareness. And she's just publishing her first book. I think it's her first book. I'll check with her in a minute. And this book is called Take a Walk on the Wild Side. I read the book myself, and honestly, I was blown away. There's such depth of understanding, but there's such a heart of suffering that lived through such deep experiences personally, so that she could be here to talk to you and to talk to me and to share her experiences for the benefit of everyone. Because the truth is, the experiences we have in our lifetime are a divine gift for our awakening. And she's sharing this precious gift with you and I today. I really, really want you to warmly welcome my friend and colleague and peer, Robyn Harris. Welcome, Robyn.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you for such an introduction, SaraSai. That's amazing.
Oh, Robyn, last night I finished your book. You sent it to me a while ago, but I finally finished it. I pre-read it, but then I wanted to go back and drink every word of it. Honestly, I enjoyed every sentence, every single sentence. There's so much openness and trust and honesty and authenticity. This is what the world is screaming out for, to have us communicate from our true voice, our heartfelt inner being expressed authentically, so that we can be known.
That's very much a part of the book. How do we reconnect with that part of ourselves that many of us, through various different situations and circumstances in our lives, may have, to a greater or lesser extent, stepped back from, because it didn't feel safe to be fully our authentic selves. So the book is that journey. How can we reconnect more fully, plug in, tune into, and express our uniqueness? Because we are all, for a purpose, unique. The world would be a boring place if we were all the same. But it's how do we then share that voice, feel safe to share that voice?
Yeah. You know, this is one of the things I loved about the way you wrote. Have you written a book before?
No, I've written articles and blogs and that sort of thing, but never a book. This is my first book.
This is incredible. You're a natural writer. Because you write from your heart, it's completely relatable. You know, people won't read much nowadays. I know you're going to do an audio version of this, but it's not a long book. So it's something that people, I think, will read, because once they open it up, they're brought immediately into the inner sanctum of your heart, into your life. And the honesty with which you write is really quite extraordinary, I think. It took so much courage to write and trust. It shows me the journey you've made from fear and lack of trust to complete trust. To share this book with the world, you have to be at home in yourself to be able to share on the depth of honesty about some of the most painful experiences without sounding like a victim. There was no trace of victim in it. And that's what makes this extraordinary as well.
And I think it's also my journey from being a victim, from being in victimhood, to realizing that was not serving me. And I was not able to get well, to be in wellness, unless I stepped away from that victimhood. So it is a journey of mine from victimhood into that sense of I am the power that I need. I can own that. It's not a power over, but it's a power with, and it's an empowerment. And just being able to know that in that kind of just quiet knowing, not having to shout about it, because it just is.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're shouting about it, it's like I'm having to make sure that people understand this, rather than just knowing, well, it is. And
you're coming from a negative, and a negative needing to overcome something. You're coming from resistance. Yeah.
A sense of lack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this is what the gift of this book, I think, can be, because in sharing that, you're bringing consciousness to the journey from victim to victor.
And it is very much about consciousness and being conscious and aware and living from that place of presence and consciousness.
But you know, the difference is
choices.
Yeah. But the thing is, Robyn, you had a very, very personal story to share, which we'll go into a little bit. I mean, I want people to have the journey themselves, but we will talk a little bit about it. As much as you feel comfortable, but I suppose because the book is out in the open, you're comfortable, right? But
absolutely, yes.
But I found myself in the story, and I think every person who reads this story, and particularly maybe women, I don't know, but I feel it will really resonate with women. The depth of hurt we feel as a default, the depth of lack of safety, which is not diagnosed in our society. It's not even part of the conversation of awareness as a default in our existence. The fact that we don't feel safe to be ourselves until we do. And of course, that's the spiritual journey, so there's nothing wrong. From my point of view, it's like a karmic journey also in bringing consciousness to whatever was unconscious, to drop past karma, past actions which may have stopped us, and to be liberated in the light of consciousness in this lifetime.
And I think it's always a journey.
Yeah.
And we may not get to the end of that journey in this lifetime.
Yeah.
But the point is the journey. It's that thing of don't worry too much about the destination. Obviously, you have a goal in sight or an intention that you're working towards, but it's more about just every step along the journey and enjoying, bringing joy into and consciousness, bringing those into every step along the journey. And that's the point of it, not the destination.
Yeah.
It's just that evolution and the growing and the learning and the wisdom that comes from every step along the way.
Yeah, beautiful. You know, when I look at the cover, Take a Walk on the Wild Side, that looks like Alice in Wonderland or one of these wonderful stories that she's about to enter an enchanted forest. And it's basically the forest of darkness into the light, and she's facing into the light, going through almost like a tunnel of exploration and inquiry. And my understanding of taking a walk on the wild side is also embracing all that you are and all that you are not. Right?
Absolutely, yes. And that people have said to me, it looks like a portal. So it is. It's stepping through from the life that we're currently leading that isn't possibly serving us.
Yeah.
If we're not feeling as well as we could do, then it's not serving us. And to step away from the conditioning, to step away from the things that hold us stuck, or that try to keep us in a pigeonhole that probably doesn't feel like it's a very good fit, and to step into the possibility, the potential of the wild, the acronym, but also wild as in nature. You look at nature, and if she's in her wild self rather than a tamed garden, but where things just seem to grow into and over one another, and it can look a bit chaotic.
Yeah.
But when you step back, you see it has a rhythm and a kind of voice and color and sense all of its own. because it has that freedom to express itself in lots of different ways in lots of different places. And that's what this image is representing, that when we step out of all of the conditioning and the things that hold us stuck and the rules and everything, and we step into, no, who am I? What if my nature was allowed to grow and express and become that wild garden? What would it look like? How would it express itself in all of its different moods and colors and scents and shapes and sizes? Because as with wild space, you might have some areas that look one way and another area that looks another way, and that's all fine. That whatever it is, however you want to express yourself and play with it and experiment with it, it's all good.
Yeah.
So long as it's done consciously and you're aware of the choices you're making and you're kind of being accountable and just keeping a sense of, well, where am I going and where is it taking me and how am I expressing and what feels most true for me.
Yeah. And you say the rules, it's also the roles. So we lock ourselves into the prison of our own making because we lack the consciousness to notice the restrictions. We don't even notice the chains that enslave us. The chains of silent agreements to behaving in a particular way. This is what I found really great in the book as well, because you invite people into the space of self-exploration, self-inquiry, to look at what they're not looking at, what we're not present to bring in presence as a gift to ourselves first, before we even think about who we're going to be in the world. Do you want to tell us what the acronym for WILD is about?
Yeah, it came from my own journey, and it kind of started as a connection to nature and observing nature in all of her forms and in all of her moods. And sometimes she can seem very quiet and subdued, and other times she's wild. And where we live, we have winds that they are quite interesting and challenging. And I am from Ireland, as I describe in the book, and when I was a child, used to visit areas like Donegal, and then we would go and see National Trust properties, which would be very
tame,
very
manicured,
very structured and manicured and just so, and they would be cared and tended, and they were very beautiful. And then other parts of those gardens might be allowed to be a little bit more natural. But then going to Donegal and seeing the wildness of nature with the seas coming in off the Atlantic,
I love that,
the winds coming off the shore, and just feeling the power of those winds and knowing that phrase of I am the storm. So allowing ourselves to express in all of those ways. So that was part of how we often take the word wild to mean quite extreme. But also wild, there's a quote in the book from Robert Bly where he says it's not about being crazy or psychotic. It's about a freedom to express ourselves, and some other great points that he makes as well. But wild the acronym actually stands for wonder, intuition, loving ourselves, and dancing with life. Because I think so often we get jaded as we get older. We get quite cynical, and we get a bit kind of resigned, sometimes apathetic, and just feel that I can't do anything, I can't change things. This is just how it is, and I just have to accept it, and I'm not comfortable with it. Instead of, if you think of a child, and a child just has these eyes of wonder. It's also sometimes described as beginner's mind, where they just want to know, why is the sky blue? What's a rainbow? Why does this do that? And why does that look like that? And all of these questions. And sometimes as adults, we get a bit fed up with that. And we get a bit frustrated. These children just, why? But when we can go back to that, just everything is awesome. Everything just makes you light up and want to know more. And that sense of curiosity and excitement. So that's all part of the wonder.
Yeah.
And then intuition, listening to our bodies. Our bodies are very, very wise biological systems. They know what they're doing.
Biological. I never thought of it like that. That's good. Yeah.
In the book, I break up words quite often because we look at them differently. And it's all about our language, our inner language, how we express ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, because that forms our thoughts, which shapes our beliefs, which creates our filters, which determine our experience in the world.
Yeah.
But intuition is getting back to listening. We're so focused in our Western world of what goes on in our brain, but we have 3 brains and we tend to ignore the other 2, the heart brain and the gut brain. And they have such a big role to play and can really guide us. They're our inner compass to help us know what is true for me. Because each one of us, we are individual and we have our individual truth of what resonates for us, what lights us up, what leads us on, what takes us to who we were born to be. So intuition, listening to, tuning into and listening to and following our intuition, I think is a really huge step in that. Loving ourselves, both as we are and as we are not. Because there are so many things in society these days. I mean, you look at social media and there's such an image there of how we're supposed to be. Height, color, shape, everything. What is the ideal? And I guess it's always been this way in art, because you look at the shape of like the female form and how it's portrayed over the centuries in art and how it changes and what the ideal was and how that changes over the centuries. But now, because of social media, it's in our face 24/7, 365. So I know some areas of that are changing now, which is great. And we're getting much more open and inclusive and we've got greater diversity. But still, there is an image of, you know, the blonde, curvy female that you might have seen in Disney movies. Again, they're getting away from that now. But there's still a sense of that.
Of who you should be. The ideal woman.
That horrible word, should. So that concept that's probably still in a lot of people's subconscious and unconscious. So we then like or dislike things about ourselves because we feel this fits that image or it doesn't. And for most of it, it probably doesn't go very close to that image. So then we might think, oh, but I should, as you say, should be like this, or I shouldn't be like that. And just rather than just thinking, but my body is amazing. Look at all it does for me. And even things like exercise, and I mentioned this briefly in the book, we often use exercise almost as a form of punishment. And, you know, we go to the gym. And,
maybe that's why I'm not a big fan. I'm not self-punishing.
And instead of thinking of it like punishment, and I have to go and I have to do so many repetitions, or I have to run so far and it's really uncomfortable. And some people love running, and that's brilliant if that's your thing. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. I'm just saying listen to your body and go with what it loves. I don't love to run. It's not my thing. I don't go to the gym. That's not my thing. So for me, it's about finding the movement that you love. So if that's running, great. If that's lifting weights, great. For me, it will be probably more something like dance, or I have animals. I love getting outdoors into nature and spending time with them and walking, that sort of thing.
And you have your own horses as well. I mean, it sounds like a haven. You're living in Wales, and honestly, I have to visit you because it seems as if you're living the ideal life now, surrounded by nature, living on purpose, that you finally kind of got it right for yourself.
It's very much been a process of manifestation. And having grown up in cities and always lived in cities, I lived in Belfast, I lived in Manchester, I lived in Greater London, lived in Bristol. But something about the countryside has always called to me. And when we first moved here, I don't know if I can do this. I have always lived in cities. I don't know if I can live in the country, if I will suddenly, you know, you think this will be lovely, and then you move and think, oh, what have I done? It's too big. It's too open. But I moved here and I've loved it ever since. and just having greenery and nature and open spaces right outside our door.
Yeah. And the world at
It's
your fingertips also.
amazing.
So it's the best of both worlds. So you can keep
Yeah.
the world on the outside, and meanwhile, you have your own inner world on the inside. But you mentioned young people. I think this book could be a great gift to young people as well, young women particularly, because we live in a world of social media insanity about external validation. And if people are enslaved by the idea of winning favor and approval on the outside by people because of the way they look or the roles they perform in their lives, acting in a particular way to stay in with your peers, all that kind of thing, there's a disconnection from yourself. It's like selling out on your own soul in the process. And so I really feel it's so relatable, the book, that we're talking about theories in a way now and about the understanding behind the book. But I want to emphasize something. It's really about a personal story, which goes into your journey. And I think that journey is so well communicated that people can find themselves in the story and find themselves out of their own story through your storytelling.
I think there's so much that we have in common, just from human experience.
Yeah.
And we have more in common than divides us, separates us, makes us different. So although the story in the book is mine, I hope that there is a lot within that is relatable on some level, that maybe you can look at more the emotions and the challenges within the book that I've described, and think, I've faced those in different circumstances. My life circumstances probably are quite different, but the thoughts that have come up, the challenges that I've faced, the emotions that I've experienced, I think they're probably more similar from person to person, obviously, than our actual personal circumstances. But I think because we are all human beings, then we do have those emotional responses, and when we're challenged, we can feel that in the same way. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's Extraordinary by Stephen Gillen, who was in prison he was a Category A prisoner in the UK, so the highest level of security.
Okay.
And he's describing how his life changed. And he actually grew up in Belfast for the first almost decade of his life. And that's where I'm from too. So,
and what era was he in? Was he in the era of the Troubles as well?
Yeah. He's the same age as my brother, pretty much.
Okay.
My brother, who's 3 years younger than me. So reading the book and thinking of my brother being another male, and then reading Stephen's story, it was like, whoa, there. But for the grace of God, could have been our family situation as well. But although the kind of start of his life, because it was in Belfast, had quite a few similarities to mine, he then goes on and he's in London later on, and he gets involved in gang and crime life. So that's very different from my experience, but yet he's very, very honest and talks about his experiences and the challenges emotionally that he went through because of all of that. And it's so relatable. And I think that even when somebody's situation on the surface of it is so different, as human beings, we can still read it and think, oh, yes, I know what you're talking about. I've experienced those challenges. I've experienced those dark moments. I've experienced those moments of what's it all about, and why am I here, and how the hell do I get myself from where I am now to where I want to be, because they feel like they're going in completely the opposite directions. So I'm hoping that my book, as you say, is relatable, and that people can read it and although maybe not identify with what the situations and circumstances I went through, but just relate to the emotions and the challenges and the questions and the existential stuff that we all go through.
I
on
think
some
there's no
level.
question about it. It's 100% relatable. So listen, how about we change gear and have a little look? Let's take a few steps back and go back to Belfast, Northern Ireland. We're going to go back to your childhood. And I want you to tell a little bit about the story of your evolution from the little girl in Belfast at the time when you were born into the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And at a similar time, I was living in Dublin. So you were in the north of Ireland, I was in the south of Ireland. So we came from similar time, but completely different experiences. And actually, I had my own experience because I was actually attending choir practice on a day, I think it was 1974, when there was a bomb in Dublin. And I was on my own at choir practice. And I had to get back home. And there was a bomb and people were killed. I think there were a few bombs in the country at the time. And so that was my personal experience of the Troubles living in Dublin. And I remember my response to it. You talk about safety in your book. My response to it at the time, I had some pocket money and I went off and I bought some Smarties and I comforted myself with sugar. Yes. I had this little stash of sugar, which was mine. And I had to find my own way home. There were no mobile phones or anything, and buses were chaotic. But I had my little stash of sugar and I made my way home. And it didn't even resonate until afterwards. I didn't know what had happened. But though I heard the explosion. And afterwards, there was an understanding of this is what people live with on a daily basis in Northern Ireland. The terror of fighting, the terror of not feeling safe. Obviously not bombs all the time, but the terror of not being able to take your security and safety for granted, and not even the license to be who you were without self-censorship or checking. Was it okay to be how you were? So let's delve back. Let's go back into our childhood and see and share a little bit with the audience. So take me back to 1968 in Belfast.
I was born in 1968, and that was pretty much the start of the Troubles. They had a series in the UK recently, BBC, Once Upon a Time in Belfast. I think it was 5 programs, a kind of a documentary, and they went through the start of the Troubles. It came out of civil rights marches, civil rights movement, and there was a lot of unrest around employment and how many people in the Catholic community felt that they often weren't employable. Nobody wanted to employ them. The majority of the population at that time being Protestant, and Catholics felt that Protestants were being employed by Protestant business owners.
Okay.
And Catholics were not getting the same opportunities. And I think that's kind of where things escalated, and so the Troubles started. And Bloody Sunday, that a lot of people would have heard of, where there was the shooting and then that became a court case, and it was shown that the army had kind of been a catalyst for what happened there. But that was on my 4th birthday.
Oh, really?
The 30th of January 1972. But not where I lived. I lived in Belfast. That was in Derry. And so growing up,
do you have any recollection of that, or just you heard about it? Okay.
No, just not directly, not from when I was 4, but because it has been covered so many times in the media since. And any time, and there was a movie as well which covered that, and James Nesbitt was the star.
Okay.
And I met the character he played. I met his sister, like in
real life. Yeah.
But because I was born in that very first year, I have no memory of anything else. That was my life. And you grow up, or you're in a situation that it just is your norm. You don't know any different.
Yeah.
My friend at primary school, her birthday was the day before mine. So our mothers were in the same maternity hospital. I don't know if they were actually next to each other, but they were there at the same time. And her father was shot and killed.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
And where I went to school, it was in behind a church. And I remember arriving at school one morning, and we went in. There was a kind of a driveway up to the church, and then the school was in behind, so we had to go round back. And walking up the driveway, there were drops of blood on the ground, and then there were bullet holes in the front wall of the church. So I remember that. I remember being on buses, and somebody might have forgotten their shopping. They left it behind them on the bus, as happens, or their lunch, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then the bus had to pull over, bomb scare, because nobody wanted to go near that plastic bag.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to check, was it just their lunch? Was it just something they bought?
Yeah.
Or was it actually a bomb? So I remember that. That was all very normal for me. And it's a horrible thing to be normal, but that was kind of how it was. And there were shops. Every time you went into a shop, so Primark or whatever you went in, there were people there to search you.
Oh, really?
So, and because they didn't have the wands in those days. Nowadays, there are a lot of security at the door of a shop, but it's more about people shoplifting.
Yes.
So you have those metal things that they pick up the tags on the clothes. But in those days, it was in case you were carrying something into the shop that you might be leaving behind, like a bomb or whatever. So they would pat you down. They would kind of do one of those searches, like you might get at an airport. If you can't go through the metal detector, you'll have one of those, or both.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was 8, we went to London, and my mum's friend lived in Epsom, so we went to stay with them. They took us up to London. We went to Hamleys and all the big shops in London. And I remember going into the shop and looking, where were the people who were going to come and search me?
Oh, wow. Gosh.
Because people search you when you go into a shop. That's how it is. And I could not get my head around. And I almost kind of felt something was missing. You know, that's an essential step. And looking back on it now, I think there was possibly an air of, is this safe not to be searched?
Yeah.
So kind of it was my safety because it was my norm. I don't know if I actually felt any safer, but it was my norm.
Yeah, it's all you knew. Yeah.
But at the same time, I remember we lived in an area of Belfast that was very close to the police headquarters. And I walked past the police headquarters every day when I was at secondary school, every day coming home. And opposite, there was a hill. So all the houses that were built on that hill had massive great walls that would have been about 10 feet high to keep the hill. So it was like keep the hill from sliding out onto the road. And in behind the pillars that you'd have got at the gateposts, there were RUC men with guns. So you would walk up to a pillar and you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah,
and then you'd walk
they were in
past,
camouflage.
There would be a gun. Well, they'd be in behind, hidden in behind the pillar.
You know something? I remember that because when we used to go up to Donegal, my mom was from Donegal, and so but we'd go through the north, we'd go through Enniskillen, and I remember as a child seeing those soldiers lying on the ground when we came to the checkpoints, and being scared, and then Dad would have to get out of the car. Dad would have to get out of the car, and I was always scared something could happen to him. You know, getting out of the car, it didn't seem like it was, it was safe. There were people with guns there. What's he getting out of the car for?
Yeah, and I'd forgotten about that because, again, so much a part of normal life.
Yeah.
We used to travel to the south. We used to holiday in Donegal, and my mum's father had a boat in Mullaghmore where Mountbatten was killed.
Yes.
So we would be up and down across the border. And we'd gotten down to Dublin. We had family in Dublin. And when you crossed the border, you would have to stop and you would have to show papers. And then later, things relaxed a little bit. And then the border, obviously, it's still there, but you drive across and you don't notice that you've driven across it.
Yeah.
But certainly when I was small, I remember that very much.
And I was in Donegal that day, actually. We were there, and I remember hearing about that. It was a big thing. I mean, it was appalling,
It was
awful.
massive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
massive turning point in
yes.
in the Troubles as well. Yeah.
And I remember Land Rovers that used to be painted green, khaki soldier green, and now they're painted white. But they would drive around and the back doors would be open with the soldiers with their guns.
Yeah.
And I always hated that. Although there were many things that were normal to me or normalized, that I never got used to.
Because it's a threat right in your face.
Yeah. And because I was from the Catholic side, I felt very much that they were not part of my community. Although I wasn't part of West Belfast, where you'd had the Falls and the Shankill and the Peace Line, where most of the more obvious trouble was. I wasn't a part of that. I was on the other side of the city. But it was in the news all the time. And if you went into town, you were always kind of keeping your eye out. And in the documentary series that I mentioned, Once Upon a Time in Belfast, they had some old footage. And there was one scene where I think it was probably in Belfast city centre or somewhere like that. A lot of people were just milling around, as would be in a city centre. But partly it was from the time and the clothes were quite drab, but also people's faces were just those kind of trauma faces where there's just kind of no expression on the face, but the eyes are full of fear.
Right.
And that really hit me seeing that, because I thought that's exactly how it was.
It's like a vibration.
Just kind of,
a frequency,
just going about their business. And there was a very big kind of campaign of be careful what you say. Careless talk. It was careless talk costs lives.
Yeah.
So there was that.
There's a TV series at the moment, actually, Blue Lights, that I've just started watching. And I've heard that being said, and it's giving a little insight into this time, I think. I don't know if it's set in modern times, I think, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. But but it's giving a little insight. I heard that saying there.
Because that is still there.
Which is a bit like omerta. It's like you're not allowed to say. And so speaking, communicating authentically can cost you your life, literally.
Yes.
That's the message.
Yeah.
You cannot be honest and you cannot share your experience, really, because it could cause harm. That's terrifying, actually, to a young child.
And if you speak out, for me, I always felt, what is this all about? Why are we fighting each other? Why are we, like I was saying, there's more that we have in common. We have more that unites us than divides us. So why can't we just talk it out? Why can't we see how much we have in common? I was very fortunate when I was a teenager that I was part of a group called Choice, and it was bringing people from different backgrounds together. And so I got to know people from the other side.
Yes.
And to see that you're just normal.
Right.
You're just like me.
Yeah.
There are things that maybe we have different beliefs, we have different values, but that's okay. That's something just to explore and to value the richness of variety within our community.
Yeah, unity and diversity.
Yeah. And so I was very fortunate. I was part of that. I was part of other things that were more about bringing the communities together. So that was my experience sort of later on and when I was more conscious. But partly why I'm not there anymore is because I just couldn't bear the way things were, and the division and the anger and the hatred and the pain, because all of that anger and hatred comes from pain.
Yeah.
So
yes, absolutely. It's a legacy of your lineage, really. You're for many people, they're carrying the resentment and revenge for previous generations also, even now.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the pain is still there in the family, in the core of the family. Yeah.
Yeah.
But things have moved on
It's
dramatically
trauma.
since then. You know, something I found interesting reading the book as well is, because I do want to talk about you personally, because I know this is the backdrop to your life, and this is like the troubles externally, but there were also troubles internally in your own personal world. So it's like there was no safe space for you. There was this canvas of impossibility, of not being allowed to be, because of the background conversations and because of a very real experience that it wasn't safe physically, even never mind mentally or emotionally, but physically it wasn't safe. Your life was in peril if you spoke out, if you were on the wrong side, if you were at the wrong place, the wrong time, if you had the wrong attachments in relationships. But in your own home life as well, you had many, many challenges. But one thing, before we go into your private life, your personal life, I found it very interesting that you couldn't speak. In some way, you didn't share your internal experience with people on the outside. So there was a lack of feeling that there was a safety to be self-expressed. And yet, you chose to work with people who were deaf. So the people who couldn't hear. So you didn't feel heard in some way, and you were looking for a way of giving voice to those who aren't heard. I mean, how extraordinary is that? From your own personal experience, it's like internalizing the problem and externalizing the solution. That's incredible.
And isn't that what we're drawn to?
Yeah.
We're drawn to finding, and this is part of the biological workings of our body on all levels,
Yeah.
physical, emotional, etc., that we want to find solutions to our challenges. We want to work through them because we know that in working through them, there's great richness, there's great wisdom, there's evolution, there's growth, there's learning, there's well-being on the other side.
Yeah.
So that's why I love the concept of putting safety in place, because that allows us to do that, to take that journey.
Creating a safe space, yeah.
And to be able to be courageous and to take those steps. Putting safety in place doesn't necessarily mean that it feels easy and that it feels entirely safe. It still feels challenging, and it still feels like it's
you certainly go through
it.
Yeah.
But when we can put some of that safety in place, and we can begin to listen to our intuition, and we can begin to just get curious with compassion, and to explore and to play with and to give ourselves permission to do that while taking care of ourselves, while knowing that there's no should, there's no have to, there's no ought. It's just the choices that you make, and it's doing that while being present for yourself and supporting yourself and doing what uplifts you, and knowing that we can just play with it. And if it feels like it's all getting a bit much, we can step back, and that's okay. It's no bad reflection on ourselves, which is where, just to go back to where we were talking about earlier, the different letters within Wild, it's where dance comes in.
Yeah.
Because so often I certainly saw my life, or saw life, as a test, a competition where I was never good enough. I never made the grade. I was always substandard somehow, no matter how hard I tried, just wasn't enough. And I was pushing, and I was striving, and I was still not getting it, still not being good enough. Versus, it's just a dance. And if I feel that I go one step forward and two steps back, that's okay. Or if I feel like I'm pushed backwards or sideways and I'm not able to move forward in a straight line, again, that's okay. If you look at a waltz, that's how it goes. You don't just move forward, you go around the floor, and sometimes you might go a little bit backwards, or you might go off to the side.
Lose your balance. Yeah.
All of it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a dance, and you can just go with that flow and see where it takes you. And it can be graceful. when we're not fighting it and when we're not beating ourselves up or thinking that it should be something different.
But this grace was hard won. This wisdom was hard won. When I look at what you went through, though, what you went through in your personal journey, I hope you're okay with speaking about some of it, because you dealt with so much dis-ease in the body and dis-ease in your own equilibrium emotionally and mentally, and it's all because you didn't have that permission. So this is the gift of this book, to give people permission to be okay with everything that doesn't feel okay, to give up the resistance to reality as you're experiencing it moment by moment. So you dealt with severe illness, really. I mean, do you want to speak about the different things you went through on your journey?
Sure. When I was at my worst, I had ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, and that started out just chronic fatigue, muscle aches, joint aches, brain fog, like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And I used to have migraines, and I've had skin conditions and all sorts of things. And then the ME got to the point where I was in a wheelchair. And then from in a wheelchair, I was in bed. I just didn't get out of bed for 2 months. And you talk about resistance and not having permission. And for me, what I would love this book to be a part of is a change in the way that we look at how to approach life. Because I think we aren't taught. I think it's changing now, and I think there are pockets where it's really getting a lot better. But when I was at school, there was a lot of fear, a lot of conditioning, a lot of rules that there was no questioning, no room to question. Is this serving us? Is this helping? It was just, this is how it is.
Yeah. That was a generational thing as well. Our parents had no self-inquiry. They were too busy. I mean, I don't know how many children your parents had, but I came from a family of 7. And there's no room to sit and psychoanalyze yourself. You're too busy getting on with life and making everything work for the family. So I think our generation is the first one to really have the ability to go within on a deeper level and evaluate, to bring consciousness to what is needed for us to emancipate ourselves from suffering in the way that this can.
And to emancipate ourselves from all of that conditioning.
Yeah, exactly.
And that expectation that this is how it has to be.
Yeah.
And if you are finding that difficult, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You are the one.
Guilt, shame, blame.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The difficulty, the challenge, the problems, all of these languages, all these words, they're all within you.
Yeah.
This is the system. If you don't fit, it's down to you.
Yeah.
Rather than, maybe the system is not a good fit for me. Maybe it's the system, and we look at the different models, for example, of disability. So you've got the medical model of disability and you've got the social model of disability.
Yeah.
And the social model is saying that it's society that disables people. So if you're in a wheelchair and there are steps, or something is too high for a person who's sat in a wheelchair, who's at fault here? Society isn't being flexible. Society isn't recognizing that we're not all the same.
Yeah. And punishing those who are not the same, in a way. No access, no freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, equity and equality that we now look at, rather than these other ways, these other perceptions and perspectives. And for me, that's what it's all about. It's perspectives, it's perceptions. So the things that were expected of me, for example, when I was at school, that didn't sit well with me, I took it as being my fault. And I, like you said, felt shame.
Yeah.
Because of that. And that led on then to eventually me becoming quite ill.
Can you give
Because
an
I was,
example of that, Robyn? Like,
well, ME is often said to be the disease of people who are perfectionists.
right.
But why are we perfectionists? Because we feel that we're below grade, we're not good enough. So we're pushing and striving and trying harder, and it's just not going to work.
But where did that feeling come from for you? Not being good enough?
It would have been a mixture of school and home.
Yeah.
And I talk in the book about my home life with my dad.
Yeah.
And my dad was an interesting character. And the more I look at it now from the studies that I've done around trauma and my own journey, I understand that he was doing his best,
Yeah.
coming from what he thought was right.
Yeah.
So, for example, I remember him saying to me, "It's a big, bad world out there."
Wow. Okay. That's programming.
And obviously, my experience was already that it was a big, bad world out there because I lived in the Troubles.
Lots of evidence. Yeah.
Exactly. And he probably, having seen all of what was going on, would have wanted to protect me from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I expect he probably was parenting in the way that he was parented.
Yeah.
Because that's the model that we work to.
Yes.
So whether his parents maybe had said the same to him, it's a big, bad world out there. You have to work hard for what you want in your life. So I was taking this on board. I was seeing the report cards that I was getting back from school. Quiet and conscientious, must try harder.
Something wrong with you being quiet and conscientious,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, not good enough, not good enough. And seeing his response to those report cards.
What was his response?
Well, just I got the impression that he was agreeing with the teachers that I wasn't doing as much as I should.
Right.
So I should try harder.
Right.
I needed to get the top grades always.
Okay, so yeah.
So that feeling like I'm pushing as hard as I can, I'm doing the most that I can, but it's not enough. I'm going to have to push harder. I'm going to have to find resources somewhere inside of me to push harder. But that perfectionism is just like a rod to beat your own back, and it just grinds you further and further down into the ground. In the end, you still feel all of that shame. You still feel like you're not good enough, and you're still trying harder. And it's an ongoing pattern. So basically, I reached burnout. Yeah. And my body said, enough. And so I was experiencing all of this pain and brain fog, etc.
Was that after your dad's death that happened, or before?
Before. So I was 16, 17 when I was diagnosed with glandular fever.
Yeah.
And then on into the post-viral fatigue, and then into chronic fatigue and myalgic encephalomyelitis. And my dad died when I was 22.
Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure the timeline. Yeah.
Yeah, I was ill for about 4 years, maybe more.
Wow, such a long time.
Yeah, I got better, I think, when I was 20-ish, 2021.
I know there were challenges between your mom and your dad, and they got divorced. And I actually have a friend from Northern Ireland as well, from Newry, and that happened to her. And her father lived in the same village with a new family. And that was devastating to her, that she'd see him across the road and he wouldn't even acknowledge her. Can you imagine?
And I'm part of a bereavement support group, and people have discussed the differences, because it's not just about loss through death, but there's loss through a situation like that.
Yes, exactly.
And when you lose the person through death, there's a process that you go through, and it's not always easy, and it doesn't always happen in a set time scale, but there is kind of like, usually, not always, but a closure. A sense of closure. Whereas if you see the person all the time, they're there in your space, you cannot there is no closure. You can't kind of put it to bed, lay it to rest. It's just coming up in your face again and again and again. How difficult, how challenging, how painful that is. And particularly if you're the child. If you're the parent, to some degree, that was your choice
Yeah.
most of the time, that
Yes.
the partnership, the relationship ended. But when you're the child and you just feel like they didn't want me, they've left me,
Yeah.
no matter how much that may be said, the other parent or both parents might tell you that's not true. On some level, most children do still feel, and because they're children and they need to make sense of it and they need to understand, they may blame themselves. It must have been me. I wasn't good enough.
Yeah, in some way you failed to be. Yeah.
I didn't keep my parents together, or it's because
Yeah.
of me that they split up, or it's because of me that my dad has left. He didn't want to spend time with me. He didn't love me. So I went through all of those.
Yeah. One of the things that really resonated, and I really felt your pain, was when your dad said to you, "Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about." Do you remember that time?
Oh, that wasn't one time. That was several times. And yes, I remember it very clearly. And it's interesting you pick up on that one, because my editor, when she read that part of the book, she came back to me and said, I don't know who it was, but somebody said that to her too. I think it was another generational thing.
Yeah.
I think that was something that maybe a lot of parents would have said at that time. And also, again, was that something that my dad's parents said to him? Is that where he got that phrase?
No, of course. There's no blame in any of the inquiry.
No.
But the result for a child is stuff down your feelings. Don't be authentic. Don't express how you feel.
It's not safe to express how you feel.
Yeah. It's like locking you into a prison of loneliness, aloneness, isolation. Never intended, I'm sure, because he probably was just repeating what he had been taught. This is the right way to teach your children. Emotions aren't good, and I mean, men suffer from this belief as well, terribly, because they're locked into that as much as women are, that it's not okay to feel and to express your feelings. But I think the resistance is so great then that it becomes a problem, where actually just expressing is a form of letting the energy flow rather than putting a damper on it, right?
Emotions supposedly are energy in motion.
Yeah, exactly.
Emotion. But when they can't be, we can't process them. And it's like traditional Chinese medicine, they talk about your qi, the flow of your energy, and it being blocked.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what that is. You've got this energy that needs to be expressed, this emotion that needs to be expressed, and the expression is part of the processing. And if you're holding it in, then where does it go? It has nowhere to go.
It's like a pressure cooker, though. So is that not what the troubles were? Potentially, the pressure cooker of repression, of rage, anger, which is usually vulnerability without a voice. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you talk about resistance. To me, resistance is fear. Why do we resist? We resist because we don't feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is that all about? How can we address that?
And resisting your own self. Resisting your own self-expression.
Because it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And Gabor Mate talks about when we are very small, we have two primal needs.
Yeah.
We need authenticity and we need attachment.
Yeah.
And
this is a very important part of the book as well. Yeah.
It will win every time when you're a little child, because without your attachment to your caregiver, how do you feed yourself? How do you clothe yourself? How do you keep a roof over your head? You can't. When you're that small, you can't. So if your parent says something like, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about," that doesn't make sense. I'll cry more. I thought you wanted me to stop. But if they say that to you and you think, but then obviously my crying, so again, you're blaming yourself. It's me, I'm crying. That makes him angry.
Yeah.
And we know now that I cannot make anybody angry.
Well, not everybody knows that, Robyn. Not everyone knows that.
The message that I received was, it's my fault
Yeah.
that you're angry because I'm crying.
I control
if
your
I
emotions.
Cry and
I
if
control
I
your
cry
emotions.
and that makes you angry, you won't love me anymore.
Yeah.
I won't have that attachment anymore.
Yeah. Terrifying.
So if my expression, my authenticity is putting this attachment at risk, I have to drop it. I have to push that down. I have to suppress it. I cannot
be
risk being me, because then I will lose your love.
Yeah.
And since I already feel that it's on hanging by a thread.
Wow, but look, do you think you're alone in this? To me,
no,
of course not. But to me, this is, so I'm going to take a broader canvas now to look at this issue, because it's very central to every human being's experience, I think. The journey from resistance through the mind's interpretation of what reality is through storytelling, which is not the truth, but is the story coming from the child's view of what it means. And then we carry that into adulthood. And everybody is really, all the adults are really children dressed up, right? So they're still children at heart, but there is a spiritual quest within that to go beyond the storytelling and the storyteller, to find the truth that was always the truth even then, which I think is the gift of this book as well. To go deeper in understanding, to go beyond reaction and resistance, being a victim of circumstance, to being a victor through understanding and living authentically as the gift at the end of the journey. Which, if people are lucky enough to read your book and to begin this process of self-exploration, they can consciously choose to leave the story that's disempowering them behind, and to live in truth and live in love, not fear.